Hi everyone and welcome back. My name is Priya Chatterjee Ray and I graduated from IIM Ahmedabad this year. I took the CAT in 2020 and I scored 100 percentile in the VARC section, which was mostly a combination of my attempt and my accuracy rate strategy. I have already shared my VARC strategy with you with some last minute tips and tricks that you must remember to be able to boost your score. From the feedback that I've been getting, I've heard that it's really helpful. So I hope that you take a look at those videos and also learn something for your own CAT attempt. I've also recently solved the CAT 2022 slot 1 VARC sectional to show you how I would have attempted that paper. And by using the same tricks that I'm going to be teaching you in this video, I got a 20 out of 21 in the RC and VA questions that I attempted. I attempted a total of 21 questions out of 24 in 40 minutes, even though I was both explaining and solving at the same time, and I only got one of those questions wrong, which was actually not even an RC question, it was a parajumbles question. So I think that's enough introduction about me. This video is your one-stop solution to learn about the elimination techniques that you need to use for VARC. If you've watched any of my previous videos about this section, you know that I've mentioned again and again, and actually almost all educators will tell you the same thing. The trick to getting an RC right is to ensure that you are not selecting the right option, but that you are eliminating the wrong options. It is never that you look at a passage and look at the four options that are given to you with a question and that you attempt or that you select only one of the options out of them. Your job is to look at each option, read it word by word, and remove the wrong options with a particular reason or solid reason in your opinion, and finally whittle down to the last or final standing option, which is more or less your correct option in most cases. This elimination method also helps because at the very outset, it helps you remove some of the additional options that are there to come down to even two close options, in which case you can decide if you want to take a 50-50 chance and attempt a question or not. So in my same last minute VARC tips and tricks video, I mentioned these 14 elimination tricks, but I've been getting a lot of comments asking me to tell you the same tricks and to explain them to you, which is why I've made this video. All of these tricks are courtesy Shabana Ma'am. I learned them from her, but so I will try to explain them to the best of my ability. However, the options that I'll be using and the examples that I'll be giving you will be from the CAT 2022 and 2021 papers. I went through all the papers to find specific examples to explain to you how you could have eliminated some options in the paper if you were taking it. This will also help you realize what the standard or level of questions is in the CAT exam, and hopefully all of this together will give you enough confidence to go forward in your own attempt and try to apply the same tips and tricks. If you haven't already, I would suggest that you watch the CAT 2022 video and let me know what you think about it. We can organize another session like that where I can try to solve another paper live for you, preferably not 2022 or 2021, because I've already looked at all the answers for those two papers, and trying to solve it live again will actually not help in any way because I know the correct answers now. Or I haven't matched it to the answer sheet, but I have a good guess at what the correct answer will be. So we can do a previous year paper that is not one of those. If you feel that you're ready to do something like that, do let me know in the comments, and I'll speak to the people on my Telegram channel and we'll figure out a day on which we can solve this together so that you can also sit and do the eliminations with me as I go along. Okay, so that's the longest introduction that I could have given to this video. Let's get started. This is your fail-proof 14 tips or 14 elimination techniques that you can use in any RC passage to remove options to be able to come down to one correct option that will fetch you the marks that you need to crack the CAT. Okay, so the first elimination technique is to look for hasty generalization. Now, hasty generalization means that you take the characteristics of one person in a community and apply it to all the people in that community. For example, I am an IIM Ahmedabad student and I do, say, content creation. There are also a few other IMA students who do content creation. Now, a hasty generalization would be for you to say something like, all IMA students do content creation. That's not true. Only a few of us do it, but you have taken the same brush and painted my entire IMA community in the same way. That is a hasty generalization. I'll actually give you two examples from the 2022 Slot 1 VARC passages. Read the passage with me. In sum, these ancient Greek and Roman philosophers saw emotions, especially strong ones, as potentially dangerous. They viewed emotions as experiences that needed to be reined in and controlled. Let's take a look at the options that they give. First, the Epicureans believed in controlling all emotions. And second, there were no Stoics in India at the time of the Roman civilization. Let's take the options one by one. In the first one, they have very widely said that all emotions are supposed to be reined in. However, we read in the passage that they saw emotions that were strong as potentially dangerous. That means that there is a subset of emotions, the so-called weaker emotions, that probably didn't have to be reined in, because nothing about this has been mentioned in the passage. So using words like all is a hasty generalization in this case. Unless the passage clearly states that all emotions are dangerous, we shouldn't paint them with the same brush. Similarly, there were no Stoics in India at the time of the Roman civilization. No Stoics at all. My questions here, or the questions in your head should be, and I think these were the exact questions I asked in the paper solving video as well. How do you know? How do you know that there were no Stoics in India at the time? How did you figure this out? Are there any historical resources that say that there were no Stoics at that time? Does the passage say that there were no Stoics at that time? Did you exist then? Did you take an attendance of all the people who existed in India during the Roman civilization? Just because it wasn't recorded as Stoicism at that point in time doesn't mean that it wasn't there, right? So you can never make a hasty generalization and say that no Stoics existed at all. Next, the next idea is called an attractive word trap. What this means is that there is one word in the passage, and an interesting sounding word, or the exact word is picked up and an option is made out of that passage itself. Now, what that word in the passage itself? What I've been saying from the beginning is that the passages that you get are things that they've picked up from newspapers, from essay sites, etc. But the examiner sits and makes the options. So the reason that you get your RCs wrong is because you fall into traps that the examiner sets. Now, the easiest trap for the examiner to set is for someone, because we've been teaching skimming so much, is for someone to say, let's just take a word that's there in the passage. The student who's taking the exam will read it and think, oh yeah, I read this in the passage, which means it's true, and they'll take that option and move ahead. I'll give you an example, right? Let's take an example from the 2022 paper. The sentence that was in the passage is as follows. In order to confirm their abnormal status, many of the undead were often accorded attributes which defied the natural order of things. So basically what this option uses several words from this sentence itself. It says, according the undead, an abnormal status is to reject the natural order of things. Those are two very different meanings. In one, you are saying that to prove that the undead are abnormal, you are giving them certain characteristics that are against the natural order of things. And the second one, you're saying that if you call the undead abnormal, you are going against the natural order of things. So notice how they've used the same words, abnormal status, according, natural order of things. They have used these words to confuse you. So your point is to understand when these word traps are being used and to understand the actual meaning behind the sentences that they give you. Now, one of my favorite elimination techniques is called the extremism elimination technique. In this, the options take something that is in the passage and take it to its extreme level. For example, if I say that my mother was angry today and the option says something like Priya's mother is always angry, that is an extremism, right? It's not true. You took a small point in time and you expanded it for the entirety of my mother's characteristics or my mother's attitude, which is an extremism. Let's take an example from the paper again. The passage read, consider what could have happened if an army general accused Marcus Aurelius of treason in front of other officers. The first movement for Marcus may have been internal, surprise and anger in response to this insult, accompanied perhaps by some involuntary physiological and expressive responses such as face flushing and a movement of the eyebrows. Examples of second movements for Marcus might have included a plot to seek revenge. Focus on the words I have stressed on. What could have happened, may have been, perhaps, might have included. These are all examples of things that could have happened. Maybe, maybe not. But the options that they gave you for this are: Marcus Aurelius was humiliated by the accusation of treason in front of the other officers. What did we read in the passage? May have felt humiliation. What are they saying? Felt humiliation. So this is an extreme form of the same sentence. Another example, again from the options. Marcus Aurelius plotted revenge in his quest for justice. What did the passage say? Examples of second movements for Marcus might have included a plot to seek revenge. That's not what is given in the passage. So the option is saying that he did do this, but the passage itself said that he might have done this. Again, taking a particular response and taking it to the absolute extreme, and that is what makes these options wrong. The next elimination technique is called verbatim. Here, they take certain words that are in the passage and they copy it word for word in the option to trick you. For example, Stoicism was founded in 300 BC by the Greek philosopher Zeno and survived in the Roman era until about AD 300. The option that they gave is: the Greek philosopher Zeno survived in the Roman era until about 300. You see how many of the words sound exactly the same. However, this is where your inference comes into play, right? It is not a direct word for word copy that will ever be correct. It is very rare that a word for word copy in the options is the correct answer. When we're talking about the passage itself, the passage is talking about Stoicism, which was founded by Zeno, surviving from 300 BC to 300 AD. The option is saying that Zeno himself survived from 300 BC to 300 AD, and I don't think that's possible. The next elimination technique is almost a combination of two. It's called narrow/broad. It means that the options that they've given you for a particular passage are either too narrow and describing too few sentences in the passage, as opposed to describing too much beyond the scope of the passage. For example, suppose the passage reads, "The Nor'westers have reached Kolkata today," and your option says, "It is raining very heavily." That is an example of too broad an option, right? The Nor'westers are a specific type of rainfall that have reached Kolkata, therefore perhaps bringing rain. But it rains very heavily in Kolkata, or it is raining very heavily in Kolkata is too broad. Why is it raining? Is it your normal monsoon rainfall? Is it suddenly some rainfall that is happening because of a cyclone? None of that is mentioned. So it is too broad an option. Let's take an example from the CAT papers. This is a long one, so read with me. This is actually the entire passage. I've just cut down some parts because this is a find out the main meaning or main inference behind the passage question. Stories concerning the undead have always been with us. From out of the primal darkness of mankind's earliest years come whispers of eerie creatures not quite alive, or alive in a way which we can understand, yet not quite dead either. They were vague and indistinct, but they were always there with the power to terrify and disturb. Such fear formed the basis of the earliest tales, although the source and exact nature of such terrors still remained very vague. And as mankind became more sophisticated, leaving the gloom of their caves and forming themselves into recognizable communities, towns, cities, whole cultures, so the undead traveled with them, inhabiting their folklore just as they had in former times. Now they began to take on more definite shapes, and it was only natural too that the undead should become connected with the practice of magic. From very early times, shamans and witch doctors had claimed at least some power and control over the spirits of departed ancestors, and this has continued down into more civilized times. Formerly, the invisible spirits and forces that thronged around men's earliest encampments had spoken through the tribal shamans, but now, as entities in their own rights, they were subject to magical control and could be physically summoned by a competent sorcerer From the Middle Ages and into the Age of Enlightenment, theories of the undead continue to grow and develop. Their names become more familiar: werewolf, vampire, ghoul, each one certain to strike fear in the hearts of ordinary humans. There were two options that the passage had. First, the writer describes the ways in which the undead come to be associated with shamans and practice of magic. Now, this is far too narrow an explanation of the passage. They have taken just one paragraph where they have said from the early times shamans and witch doctors had claimed at least some power. They have taken just one paragraph in an entire 4-paragraph passage and made it the main theme behind the passage. You and I clearly know that they've discussed a lot more in the passage. So this option is too narrow. Then the next option was, the passage describes the failure of human beings to fully comprehend their environment. This is too broad. However powerful these so-called undead creatures might be, they do not constitute the entire environment. You have studied Venn diagrams. If the environment is this big, the undead will form a small part of it. So it is incorrect to say that just because the humans do not understand the undead, or because they are vague and indistinct, the humans don't understand the entirety of the environment surrounding them. This is too broad an option. Okay, so the next option is to have an option that is out of scope, which basically means that you're talking about something and then the option takes it to a completely different tangent. For example, in the CAT paper of 2022, the passage read, and this was where you had to find summaries: petitioning is an expeditious democratic tradition used frequently in prior centuries by which citizens can bring issues directly to governments. As expressing of collective voice, they support procedural democracy by shaping agendas. They can also recruit citizens to causes, give voice to the voteless, and apply the discipline of rhetorical argument that clarifies a point of view. By contrast, elections are limited in several respects. They involve only a few candidates and thus fall far short of a representative democracy. Further, voters' choices are not specific to particular policies or laws, and elections are episodic, whereas the voice of people needs to be heard and integrated constantly into a democratic government. The options that this contained were: by giving citizens greater control over shaping political and democratic agendas, political petitions are invaluable as they represent an ideal form of a representative democracy. Now, nowhere in the passage have they mentioned that they're giving citizens a greater control over shaping political and democratic agendas. They have only mentioned that petitions help in shaping agendas. They don't say if the citizens are the ones who are gaining more control to do it. Moreover, nowhere in the passage is there any mention of an ideal form of a representative democracy. They've said that in some places the representative democracy falls short, but saying that this is the ideal form of democracy takes it to a completely different tangent. Similarly, the next option was, petitioning is definitely more representative of the collective voice, and the functioning of a democratic government could improve if we relied on petitioning rather than holding periodic elections. Again, nowhere in the passage have they mentioned which of the two, or if either one at all, would lead to a more ideal form of a representative, or would lead to a more democratic form of government. They haven't said that the democratic government would improve in any way. In a faulty comparison, there's a normal paragraph talking about two things in general, and the options compare these two against each other and suddenly say that one of them is better than the other. For example, Jack and Jill are both great students in class. Jack takes tuitions from a professional tutor, and Jill takes the help of her university-educated sister. That's all the passage says. But the option suddenly presents you with something like Jack was a better student because he went to a professional tutor. Again, nowhere in the passage has it mentioned that because Jack went to a professional tutor, was he better? They haven't compared Jack and Jill at all. They've just said that they're both good students. So this is a faulty comparison. Now, let's look at an example from CAT. This is, I think, the 2021 paper. The passage reads, there's a common idea that museum artworks are somehow timeless objects available to admire for generations to come. but many are objects of decay. Even the most venerable old master paintings don't escape. Pigments discolor, varnishes crack, canvases warp. This challenging fact of art, world life, is down to something that sounds more like a thread from a morality tale. Damien Hirst's iconic shark floating in a task, entitled The Philosophy of Death in the Mind of Someone Living, is a work that put a spotlight on inherent vice. When he made it in 1991, Hirst got himself in a pickle by not using the right kind of pickle to preserve the giant fish. The result was that the shark began to decompose quite quickly, in preserving liquid clouding, the skin wrinkling, and an unpleasant smell wafting from the tank. The option read, museums are left with the moral responsibility of restoring and preserving the artworks, since artists cannot preserve their works beyond their life. Nowhere has anyone mentioned anything about a comparison of the museums and the artists. The passage only states that, as an example, that this Hearst character was not able to preserve his artwork, and said that museums also face trouble doing this because at the end of the day, everything will perish. So where is this comparison between museums and artists coming from? Next, wordplay. Now, wordplay is not the same as absolute word trap because wordplay means distortion. It is a kind of playing around with words, if I were to give you the simplest definition. An example would be me saying that the sun was shining brightly and someone else saying that the sun was a gorgeous globe of delicious mango. Yeah, I took that example from Hanuman. But you see how they've played around with the words to make it sound more than. Let's take an example. Again, this is the same passage about the museums, so I want you to read it. Let's look at the options. First, museums have to guard timeless art treasures from intrinsic defects such as the deterioration of paint, polish, and canvas. Again, nowhere in the passage have they mentioned that museums have to guard these paintings from their internal defects. The passage states that there is not much we can do to control these defects. So there's a very clear wordplay on this entire idea of these defects and the deterioration that is bound to happen. Another example was the next option. The role of museums has evolved to ensure that artworks are preserved forever, in addition to guarding and displaying them. Wordplay. The passage says that it is wrong to assume that artworks can be preserved forever because they will decay. No one has said that it is the museum's job to also ensure that they are preserved forever, because the passage says that they can't do this. So this again is a wordplay. And this is where I see so many of my subscribers and students go wrong. No external knowledge. This means go by what the passage says. If the passage says that quantum dots can cure cancer, that is your holy grail. Now you can be a quantum physicist and know that this is not true. Even I know that this is not true yet. But it doesn't matter. Jharo your knowledge later. In the CAT exam, whatever is written on the screen is what is correct. If the author says that the sun rises in the west, then accept that the sun rises in the west and solve the passage accordingly. Let's look at an example. Several of the world's earliest cities were organized along egalitarian lines. In some regions, urban populations governed themselves for centuries without temples and palaces, without any indication of temples and palaces that would later emerge. In others, temples and palaces never emerged at all, and there is simply no evidence of a class of administrators or any other sort of ruling stratum. It would seem that the mere fact of urban life does not necessarily imply any particular form of political organization, and never did. Far from resigning us to inequality, the picture that is now emerging of humanity's past may open our eyes to egalitarian possibilities we otherwise would have never considered. Now, the option is a very interesting piece of theory that most of us have learned in our 6, 7, 8 history, civics, geography classes. It says that the emergence of a class of administrators and ruling stratum transformed the egalitarian urban life of ancient cities to the hierarchical civil organizations of today. Anyone who has read about the Harappan civilization chapter and then gone ahead to read about the early Vedic age and later Vedic age knows that once kings arose and once people started governing each other, then this whole stratum and the different layers of society came to be. That is something we learnt. But according to this passage, we don't know this. This is an additional piece of information. Nowhere in the passage have they mentioned what happened or how the civil life changed. It's said that in the earlier times, there is no example of there being any hierarchical structures. So even though you know that this option is true, and I agree with you, this option is true, it is not the correct answer for the passage because it is not mentioned in the passage. Okay, elimination technique number 10, wrong cause effect. When something is happening for a particular reason, but we are attributing it to something else entirely. These are in options where you see words like leads to, as, since, because of. Let's go back to the example of the foreign peacekeepers. Foreign peacekeepers often exist in a bubble in the poor countries in which they are deployed. They live in posh compounds, drive fancy vehicles, and distance themselves from locals. This may be partially justified as they are outsiders, living in constant fear, performing a job that is emotionally draining. But they are often despised by locals, and many would like them to leave. A better solution would be bottom-up peace building, which would involve their spending more time working with communities, understanding their grievances, and earning their trust rather than only meeting government officials. The option that we were presented with said, extravagant lifestyles and an aloof attitude among the foreigners working as peacekeepers in poor countries have justifiably made them the target of local anger. Nowhere in the passage have they drawn this link clearly, so for us to just attribute local anger to this attitude of foreigners would be wrong, which made this option the incorrect option in the exam. When I was solving the VARC paper the other day, you would have seen me choose certain options because I said that they sounded better. Uses better words to explain what is meant by a particular sentence. Again, using the foreign peacekeepers example, let's look at the options. The environment in poor countries has tended to make foreign peacekeeping forces live in enclaves, but it is time to change this scenario. The other option is, peacekeeping forces in foreign countries have tended to be aloof for valid reasons, but would be more effective if they worked more closely with local communities. Now, both of these options are true. It is true that the foreign peacekeeping forces are living in enclaves. You are saying that the environment in poor countries has made foreign peacekeeping forces live in enclaves. Now, this environment can mean anything. It could just mean that there's been bombing going on outside and therefore the foreign peacekeeping forces are living in caves. Similarly, saying that it is time to change the scenario is very vague. But the second option uses more words or better words to describe this. They give the way for you to make this attitude of theirs changed. They give you examples of what you can do to make it more effective, which is to work more closely with local communities. The next way of elimination is tone. Now, the most obvious example of this is to look at the entire paragraph, which is given in a particular tone, happy, sad, angry, whatever, and suddenly the tone of it changes in the example or in the options that are given to you. For example, if the entire passage is something about the problems that Indian workers are facing in Qatar, and then you come in workers as in the fact that they have tough working conditions, that they can't come home too easily, that they're treated badly, and the entirety is a more negative sounding tone, right? But suddenly the option that you give is the fact that the UAE or the United Arab Emirates is really loved by Indians because they have union rights there, is a positive tone. You suddenly went from the negatives of Qatar to the positives of UAE. So there's a shift in tone. Let's take an example from the CAT passages. Developing countries are becoming hotbeds of business innovation in much the same way as Japan did from the 1950s onwards. They are reinventing systems of production and distribution and experimenting with entirely new business models. Why are countries that were until recently associated with cheap hands now becoming leaders in innovation? Driven by a mixture of ambition and fear, they are relentlessly climbing up the value chain. Emerging market champions have not only proved highly competitive in their own backyards, they are also going global themselves. Look at the tone of this passage. It is very positive in its nature, right? They're saying good things about developing countries, how they're ambitious and how they're becoming global themselves. In an option, you see a switch in tone. Developing countries are being forced to invent new business models which challenge the old business models so they can remain competitive domestically. You see how there's a slight shift in tone? The passage itself is very positive, saying that changing times are making them more ambitious, as in they're doing this out of their own free will. They're going global as a good thing. But the option makes it sound like if they don't do it, they are, for lack of a better word, screwed. So that's a negative tone, and that's why this option is considered incorrect. Lucky number 13, way of elimination is to check both sides. You will often find that very long options are given in your questions, right? And one part of them is correct, but the next part, which is separated by a, and, but, etc., is wrong. So it is important that you read both parts of the passage. Don't both parts of the options. Don't just read one part and say that this is correct, right? Let's look at another passage. Biologists who publish their research directly to the web have been labeled as rogue, but physicists have been routinely publishing research digitally called preprints. Prior to submitting in a peer-reviewed journal, advocates of preprints argue that quick and open dissemination of research speeds up scientific progress and allows for wider access to knowledge. But some journals still don't accept research previously published as a preprint. Even if the idea of preprints is gaining ground, one of the biggest barriers for biologists is how they would be viewed by members of their conservative research community. The option said, preprints of research are frowned on by some scientific fields as they do not undergo a rigorous reviewing process, but are accepted among physicists as a quick and open way to disseminate information. Now, the second part of this option is correct. The passage does say that the physicists are more accepting of this because it disseminates information. But the first part and the whole idea about preprints not being accepted because they do not undergo a rigorous reviewing process has not been mentioned in the passage anyway, and it's not an assumption that you can make. You don't know why the biologists are refusing to accept the preprints. Therefore, you have to check both parts of the options before the but and after the but. The final option before the bonus tip is quantity versus quality. This basically means that you are speaking about a quantitative issue in the passage or a qualitative issue in the passage, and in the option, they change the quantity or the quality into its other version. Again, taking an example that Shabana Ma'am had used. Aside from competition for employment, there was also competition for living space in increasingly crowded cities. While segregation was not legalized in the North, racism and prejudice were widespread. The option is, as cities teemed with people, there was a dearth of good living spaces. Pay attention. The actual passage only speaks about a competition for living space, as in a supply issue of a number of living places. For example, there were 20 people, only 10 living spaces, so the number or the quantity of living spaces was falling short. The option has made it completely different. The option is talking about good living spaces, as in it's completely possible that there were 20 living spaces, but 10 of them were next to a sewer, so they weren't good living spaces. These are two very different things, and therefore they're a red flag in your option elimination. It is very easy for you to skim through the passage, but when it comes to reading the question and the option, you have to make sure that you read every word with immense attention. Let's look at this. In order to confirm their abnormal status, many of the undead were often accorded attributes which defied the natural order of things. We've read this before, we know this. Which one of the following best expresses the claim made in the statement? Look at the option that they gave. You can call it an attractive word trap if you want to, but read carefully and you'll see what I mean. The undead are deified in nature's order by giving them defined attributes. Now, the actual passage uses the word defied, which means went against. The option uses the word deified, which means to treat someone as a deity, as in to make someone feel, to give someone the position of God. the difference is one letter, defied versus deified. It's so close, but if you were skimming through the options or the question, it is very likely that you would mark this and get it wrong. So, the bonus tip is to make sure that you read every word of the question and every word of the options very clearly. So that's it. Those are the 14 tricks of elimination that I had and that you should definitely be using in your own RCs and also VA to be able to eliminate the wrong options. Again, a huge shout out to Shabana Ma'am who came up with these elimination tricks, because if it weren't for her, I would have never learned them myself and would have never managed to get the score that I did. I learned these tricks 1 week before my actual CAT exam, and I practiced them on every paper that I had, which is what I will suggest to you now as well. Every paper that you go ahead and solve, every mock, every sectional, make sure that you try to eliminate an option using the elimination tricks that I've given you in this video. Go back to previous year papers and see when you eliminated an option, were any of these tricks what you could have used to get them out of the way? I just had to go through 2 years of papers to find examples for each of these tricks. So clearly they could have been applied to all of them. In fact, I had to forcefully stop myself from putting in more examples because this video was getting too long. So that's it from me. I'm almost done with all of the pre-CAT 2023 videos. I've uploaded the 75-day strategy, the 50-day revision strategy. I've uploaded my last-minute tips and tricks for all the sections. I have done a live VARC solving. I have given you the elimination tricks. I will give you one last video, which is about the mindset or the head game that you need to keep, head space that you need to be in before the exam. But that will come next week or next to next week, so that you are done at that point with all mocks and are just concentrating on getting into a winner's mindset. So stick around for that. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, comment, join our Telegram family. We're at 700 people now, which is crazy. I would have never expected to have so many people on that group, but it's great because I don't have to do anything in it anymore. People ask each other questions and answer the questions for themselves, which is great and really makes my life a lot easier. I would say that this is the last thrust that you need to give going forward. So please give it your all and best of luck and study hard.